Well, thank you for joining us today, everybody, on the Experience Revolution podcast. I'm super excited to have our guest today. It is Brenda Larson, and Brenda joins us from the Community Blood Center in beautiful Appleton, Wisconsin. Whereas we're recording this today, it's pretty darn cold. Thanks for joining us today, Brenda. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Good. A little cold, but otherwise good.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm thrilled to have you here because at the Community Blood Center, your title is Manager of Learning and Organizational Development. And you're also the project lead on the project that we at the DeJulius Group have been working on with you all for about a year or so now. And so you're kind of shepherding this process through the organization. You're in all of the meetings, all of the workshops. You run all the meetings afterwards with your sponsor team that's kind of overseeing this effort. And so I wanted to ask you a couple of specific questions about the rollout and training that you did once you all created your action statements, supporting pillars, and list of nevers and always, because you had to do something a little unique in your world because of the locations, the amount of locations you have in your organizations. But before we get to that, why don't you tell us a little bit about Community Blood Center, who you service, your locations, all the employees you have, and the distance you cover. Can you give us a little bit of a snapshot of Community Blood Center?
Yeah, absolutely. So CBC has been around for quite a long time, and we actually started with one location located in Appleton, Wisconsin, and we served two local hospitals, one in Kaukauna and one in Appleton, Wisconsin. And since they have opened, we have continued to grow. So we now serve over 40 hospitals in the UP, Wisconsin, and Illinois. We collect over 50,000 blood donations annually across all of our locations to serve all of those hospitals. The thing that really makes the Community Blood Center so unique is that we collect blood within our communities and give it right back to the local communities that we live and work in. We have around 200 employees that work at our locations. We have a handful of centers. So our primary location is in Appleton, Wisconsin, where we have our headquarters as well as one of our donation centers. We also have a donation center in Little Chute, and then we have one in Green Bay as well as Wausau, and then up in Rhinelander, Merrill area. And then we opened a location in Chicago, Illinois last year.
So you cover a pretty large area. Just for our listeners today, can you share just a little bit of even drive time, right? Because it's a challenge for training, right? Obviously, we have great technology these days like Zoom or Teams, and it helps us facilitate a lot of meetings. But I know in your world, when you want to train folks, a lot of times it's better to get people in person. So sometimes they're coming to the Appleton headquarters, sometimes you're going to them. So what's some of those drive time distances that you have to deal with when it comes to your training sessions?
Yeah, so our Chicago location is around 4 hours for us to get from our headquarters building to there. And obviously, if you're from the Chicago area, depending on what time you're driving in,
Right.
the drive in the city portion might take you almost as long as the drive to get to the border of Illinois and Wisconsin. And then our folks that are up north in the Rhinelander area, it takes us about 3 hours to get up there.
Wow. And so, as someone that's really in charge of training for the organization, you're responsible for either getting those people down to you in Appleton and scheduling that, or going to them and providing that training, which obviously can present a lot of logistical challenges. And by the way, you need people to be collecting that blood, whether it's at one of your donation centers or on the mobile units. So you're constantly dealing with all those other needs of time and availability, et cetera, and still you have to get people trained.
Absolutely. It really takes a village to kind of get the scheduling all in line. We have somebody here who does primary scheduling for our Fox Cities and our Northwoods operations. And then we have two other people that do scheduling for our Wausau and our Chicago location. So it's working with all of them and identifying when we don't have drives, when we have slower times in the centers, and then also building our trainings around when a staff member is going to be available.
Mm.
So, working really closely with our scheduler here, she was scheduling 4 to 5 of our collections people before or after their shifts to really kind of get them in And then we were building trainings around their specific schedule. So our office folks, we were letting them know, hey, we're running a training from this time to this time on this day, based really on what our collection staff was doing out in the field.
Yeah, right. And you mentioned shifts, and to compound some of the complexities you deal with, you have multiple shifts, right? You have not all, but some of your departments that operate 24/7 across the organization. So just another layer of complexity when you're trying to schedule folks.
Yes, absolutely. So obviously, injuries don't just happen during the daytime. So our staff are here 365 days a year, 24/7. So we always have somebody here at the center processing blood or getting blood out the door in case there's any kind of emergency. We have some staff that are in our lab operations that only work part-time, or the days that they work, it potentially is 3 days a week. We have some staff that only work weekends. So scheduling doesn't sound too horrible for 200 people, right? Like we can get 200 people through trainings pretty quickly when our large conference room holds 24 people. But the scheduling piece gets a little bit crazy when you're really figuring out what everybody's schedules are.
Yes, for sure. So here's what I want to talk about today and why I was really excited to have you on. Not only because I know firsthand some of the great work that you have done. Oh, and by the way, congratulations, because you are going to very soon be a graduate of the Customer Experience Executive Academy when you come in for your next session in a couple of weeks here, and then you'll be a proud graduate. So it's been so great for me to work with you and be able to see what you've been able to accomplish. Some of those things of scheduling all those trainings that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes here, but to also just see how you've grown within your focus on the experience, both internally and externally, and been able to navigate within the organization. Because everyone who's a project lead or an executive, when it comes to focusing on the experience, they all have to navigate these things, right? Everyone's fighting for that share of time, share of the mind, what we want people to be thinking about, focused on, what marketing should be working on, etc. We all have to deal with those things, and you've done it very, very well, and it's great to see. But here's what I want to talk about today. Here's what I think is really interesting to our audience, because a lot of folks that listen are going through the same process of either creating some tools and rolling them out. Maybe they have, and they're thinking back of what could be better, what else could we be doing. Some maybe haven't started the process yet. And so what you were able to do, which I thought was a little unique, and it was a little, not a little bit, it was a lot of effort on your part that we'll get to. But what you were able to do was get this rollout, get this action statement, get this training out to everybody in small bite-sized classes as opposed
Mhm.
to a large all 200 people all hands on deck meeting. And there were some pros and some cons to that. But first, before we get there, let me just give folks a quick overview. We did have an all hands on deck meeting that took place. We were only allotted, I believe, about 20 minutes or so to kind of give a big picture rollout of, hey, here's what we've created. We've created a new action statement that we're all going to focus on as an organization. Doesn't matter if you're front of house working at a donation center or back of house in the lab and occasionally getting a call from a hospital. We're all focused on the experience and following this action statement. Here are our pillars, and here are our nevers and always. And we had a couple of folks from your team that were part of the creation process that were more frontline folks talk about those and share them and talk about how they work and why we have them. So it was a really, really good use of 20 minutes to kind of introduce everybody in the organization. And we had just about everybody. I know some people joined on Teams, not everybody was in the same room, but we did have a good chunk of your 200 folks on that meeting. So that started off really, really well. But
Mhm.
then you had a challenge, right? You wanted to go deeper with everybody and really make sure that they understood this content, especially what it means to me in my role.
Yep.
And so you created a 90-minute training session and then scheduled everyone to come into the Appleton office and go through that 90-minute session. Now, what I found really, really helpful with that is that allowed you to go a little deeper when you had folks that were in a specific job function, a specific role. Maybe they're at a donation center, allowed you to go a little deeper in conversations they may have with a donor or whoever the customer may be versus someone in the lab. So it allowed you to really go and do a deeper dive. Can you give us a quick overview? First of all, how many training sessions did you actually do to get through all 200 folks?
So we ended up with doing 31 training sessions.
Wow.
Um, so we have some things in place. One of the things that people will learn as they go through the program with you guys is that you're going to learn a ton about your organization and how to do things better. If you've never done large trainings like this before, you're going to learn from yourself. So we already have some stuff in place. We did some trainings around health and safety right after we finished up our customer service training. And we already eliminated, I think we got down to almost 20 trainings. So we have been learning from ourselves and from our staff through this entire process. Our staff have been awesome in helping us create content and really, I think they're really bought into the fact that this is their program. It's not just me or a team of people in leadership that are saying, okay, here is our new thing that we're doing. They're being asked right from the beginning when we did our pre interviews with staff. Like they were bought into the fact that we were asking their opinion, and their opinion matters, and they're seeing that in the training and everything we're building.
That's great. So 31 total training sessions. What was the timing that took? That was about 2 months, maybe a little longer to get through all
Yeah, it was about 3 months.
3 months. Okay. And I'm sure there was a lot of kind of wheeling and dealing to get people available and shift switching, et cetera, to make sure that everyone was able to go through that. But you did eventually get through everybody in the organization, correct?
Yes, everybody has gone through the training. Even we had a staff member that is currently just part-time. She works when she is on school breaks. So we were actually able to get her when she was off over break for Thanksgiving. So that was really nice. Really being able to work with our leaders to get these people all into trainings where they're with people in different departments that they might not
Hmm.
necessarily know, which I also think was really cool is we were pulling together different people in the organization. They were hearing and seeing people that they've never talked to in real life. They've maybe
Yeah.
communicated through email, but they haven't actually had the opportunity to interact. So I think that was really important as well.
Yeah, for sure. And so again, the value that I really saw from doing this, and again, it was a lot of work, and we'll get to that in just a second here, right? You had to create the 90-minute session, you had to deliver it 31 times over the course of basically a quarter of time. But what really appealed to me about going through that process was the deep dive, right? That you were able to give a smaller section of folks that deep dive into this very important content, what it looks like for them, how they live up to it, allowing them to digest it a little bit, maybe ask questions, maybe ask about certain scenarios, what happens when a donor says this, that sort of thing. So I'm just curious if you could share with us, now that you've gone through that process, since you wrapped it up at the end of 2024. Now that you've gone through that process, what were some of your learnings? What were some of the things that went really, really well, right? That really made that extra effort worth it? What were some of those things that came out that you look back now and say, yeah, that was a good use of time?
I think there's a couple different things that come to mind right away. I think some of it is hearing the collaboration between different departments, hearing that there's some frustration on two different sides. One team is frustrated with another team because they don't think that they're doing something, when in reality, both of our teams were really doing what they were supposed to. There was just not that knowledge around it. So we would have those cross-functional teams kind of coming together where we could really kind of tackle some of the things that they thought weren't maybe necessarily happening, or we could go back to those teams and say, hey, this one team is stressed out because they don't think you guys are doing this. Maybe we need to do a little bit of retraining around that. So that's
Mm,
like one of the first ones that comes to mind is there was a lot of opportunity for departments to come together after the training to really identify some of the other issues that popped up. And then the other one was just we've started doing some more around our leaders asking our team members, like, hey, remember we did this training? What are some things that we've been doing well or things that we haven't been doing well? And one of my favorite stories is a courier came in. It was right after he went through the training and he wanted to deliver a separate set of blood products to a hospital that was on his way to where he was going. So he would have been driving almost right past one hospital to go to another. And he's like, hey, I can take this. And they're like, nope. that's supposed to go with this driver. And he's like, well, why can't we change it? And they're like, that's the way we've always done it. And he's like,
Mm.
you can't say that to me. Brenda told me that we can't say that anymore. We need to start thinking about ways to do things differently. And they were like, this is the way we're doing it. And he said he was mad and he walked out to the van and he was getting a seatbelt on, doing all of his safety checks to bring the blood to the hospital. And he said, he was like, I'm in the van, I'm frustrated. I'm gonna drive right past this other hospital. And then there was a little tap on the window, and they're like, yeah, you can bring that blood with you too. So there are some things that we're doing and are always and never statements that are going to take some work. And we say that right in the training. Like there are some things in the nevers that we do and we do them hard here, but it's going to take time and it's going to take work and it's going to take everybody working together and being respectful to be able to make some of those changes and make our processes better.
For those listening that maybe not be too familiar with the DeJulius Group, what Brenda's referring to, her list of always and nevers, it's part of the process when we do our action statement workshop. We create an actual list of things that we always do as an organization or we never do, and they're very often behavioral focused, and sometimes they're pretty simplistic. Maybe even a lot of people say sounds like common sense, but as we know, common sense is not always that common. And a lot of organizations can build up some bad habits over time. And the one you're referring to, Brenda, I know was an issue within the organization that so many do. It's that mindset of we've always done it this way. Why would we change? And it's kind
Mhm.
of that growing comfortable with the way things are, but not looking for change that might be more effective, more efficient. In this case, way more efficient, right? Why have a second driver go on a route that we could already cover? So it is an organizational change, as you brought up, right? It's something that needs to be focused. Your 90-minute training, while fantastic and allows to give that deep dive, is not going to change the organization necessarily if we're not focused on this going forward. So it's great to hear that you just brought up that leaders are focused on this. They're talking about, they're asking about what's going well, where can we get better? Because we constantly need to be looking at where we're improving, but also maybe where we have more opportunities to improve that we haven't been able to. And I have a follow-up question too, Brenda. You brought up that one of the interesting things that came out of the training was you identified some areas where we need to go back and retrain in some other areas of the business. I'm just curious, were those mostly hard skill? We say hard skills like how you do the job versus soft skills, how you deliver. Was it mostly hard skill? Was it a combination of hard skill and soft skill? What were some of those things that came to light that needed some additional focus?
I think it's both. I think some of it is just reminding people that we assume that they've been donating blood forever. So one of our always and nevers is never assume understanding, always offer your knowledge. So one of the reasons why people get deferred is because they have a low hematocrit level. And we will often tell them, like, your iron's low, you can't donate.
Mhm.
I'm not going to get into the whole science of it because I will probably mess it up. But there are times where we tell staff, like, you can't donate because this level is low, or we'll tell customers,
Mhm.
your level's low, you can't donate today. But we don't provide them maybe with great education. Sometimes we give them a piece of paper, and that piece of paper probably ends up in a recycling bin or ends up at the bottom of their floor in their car, and then it gets tossed when they clean their car. But educating them around, hey, like, your levels are low, but here are some things that you can do in order to increase those levels. Educating them around your levels are low, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. You're low and you can't donate, because if we take some blood from you, we're also going to be taking that property of that blood with you, which isn't going to make you feel good after the fact. So educating them around what that actually means, because our TR staff will then call donors and say, hey, we want you to donate. And they're like, nope, I was deferred because my hematocrit is low, or they'll say my iron is low. And then TR thinks that our collection staff isn't educating them. So
Mm.
they might be, but are they educating them in enough of a way that's making an impact for them to understand the changes that they need to make?
Yeah,
I
that's
remember.
a really good point. I didn't think of it that way prior, but if we don't if we don't do that education piece well, we may have donors that think I can't donate ever again, and you can
Mhm.
call me, but they told me no, versus it being a temporary and solvable issue.
Mm-hmm. And people have experienced that before, right? Somebody told me no, and now somebody's telling me yes, and it makes you feel uncomfortable. It makes you feel like,
Hmm.
okay, do the staff at CBC know what they're talking about? And they absolutely do. I think sometimes we just need to make sure, again, we're sharing that knowledge that we have. It becomes so familiar to us because it's something we do day in and day out. It's something our staff breathe every single day.
Hmm.
They're dealing with hundreds of people that come through our centers or our mobiles. And it's not that we don't care because we absolutely do, but sometimes I think we just assume, like we tell them, like, oh, your level's low, and they know what that means, and they don't.
Right.
So it was a really good learning opportunity for us to think about how do we change the way we present that information. We
Mm.
present it on paper. Is that the way that the world is changing? You think about how people receive information nowadays, and it's so driven through our phones, through
Right.
different social media platforms. You know, how do we change the way we present that information so that people can receive it in a way that makes the most sense to them?
Right. It's such a great point going from paper to electronic, but even, if you ask a lot of consumers out there if they got electronic communication, an email, for example, sometimes the longer the email, the less likely it's going to get read, right? So it's getting that
Mm-hmm.
information in usable versions for whomever that customer is. Great
Yep.
point. So follow-up question on the training. So you created a 90-minute session, really a deep
Mhm.
dive for everyone in the organization on these tools we're talking about, your action statement, the supporting pillars, and the always and nevers list that you've created. And then you rolled it out over 31 sessions. So I know that we have a lot of folks listening today that probably are thinking they need to do something similar, whether it's an hour session or 90 minutes, but getting smaller groups together of their teams and going deeper, whether they do it departmentally, however they decide, but going a little deeper and spending more time on these things. So looking back, now that you've gone through this process, you created the content, you held 31 sessions. What were some of the pitfalls or roadblocks that you ran into that you can warn people of that might be taking on a similar endeavor?
Yeah, so one of the things that I learned when we had smaller groups, small groups are great because there's a lot more opportunity for us to kind of dive into some of those specific questions from those departments, but it would start to lack that interaction between cross departments. So
Uh,
that was something that was kind of a bummer. It doesn't lack, it lacks almost a little bit of the energy. You'll notice when you have a group of 18 to 24 people, there was a lot more chatter, there was a lot more excitement. Some of the activities that we built into the training where we're getting people up and moving were just a little bit more well received than some of the trainings where you only had 3 to 4 people. Some of them are maybe in roles where that's really not their space. So that was one of the pitfalls that we learned in the training was really just how few people in a class is going to be too few for some of the energy that we're trying to deliver with.
Great point. So looking back, what would you say the sweet spot was? What would you, if you were to do this again in the future, what's the ideal class size from what you learned?
I think for us, based on the space that we have in our headquarters building where we were doing the trainings, 18 was a really good sweet spot for us. One of the activities that we have them do is tied to our pillar of never work alone, always be a team. And
Mm.
we used an activity called Zoom, where it is a bunch of pictures that when you lay them all out in sequence, it's something really small. So it's like a top of a rooster's head. So all you see in the image is the comb. And then the next image is the rooster and it's from, the chest up. And then the next picture is the rooster. And they have to get in order from
Mhm.
smallest picture to largest picture. And when you can do that, and I had two teams going at the same time, it was a little bit of that competitive edge where they were
Sure.
trying to compete against each other and help solidify some of the training pieces that I wanted to talk about. It made an opportunity for me to hit on all of the different things that are happening in our departments where maybe we aren't working great together because we're working in silos. So they were able to see how that exactly happened because I had two different groups. So what I did is I hid a middle chunk. So they worked independently, but there was a whole middle piece that they were missing because no one ever
Wow.
asked the question. No one, I never told them they had to work separately, but I was like, okay, here is your stuff and here is your stuff. So I kind of alluded to the fact that they were separate, but never
Yeah.
really said go work separately. So they never worked together. So it was a really good
Hmm.
opportunity for us to bring it back to that's how projects kind of fall apart sometimes. You have groups that
Interesting.
aren't working together. So that was kind of the sweet spot, I think, for that training was to really be able to hit on a couple different things that we weren't doing great in the organization.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I think, um, we always say that collaboration really works well in groups, small groups of seven or less, right? Once you get to eight or nine or 10, collaboration is, people can hide. They don't have to share their opinion, etc. But to your point, the energy of a training and energy in the room, I agree. I think 18, 20 people is really a good place to be. So it's kind of that little dance, like you said, right? We have 18 people, 20 people, they're sharing ideas, they're working together, but when we have to do any idea generation or focus time, then we break them into those smaller groups and have them work in more of a collaborative environment, which is great. So really the best of both worlds.
Mhm. And we're able to do that in our training as well. We originally, one of the first pieces we had them do was talk about who our customers are at CDC because we have a lot of different customers. So as we go through this customer service training, we're going to build some pieces that are going to be kind of solid across the board, but a lot of our customers are unique. We have donors, we have sponsors, we have coordinators, we have our hospitals. So we have a lot of different customers that have some uniquenesses to them, and we need to
Mhm.
train to that and identify
Right.
where some of our gaps are. So we were able to do that in some small groups. We had them get together and write on, the large post-its, like who are our customers and just brainstorm. And they came up with so many customers. Dave facilitated one of our trainings when we were first building this, and we had such a huge list of customers. And the thing that I thought was so cool in these trainings is probably the first 6 or 7 trainings, there were staff that were coming up with customers that we had never thought about in our original
Right.
session or hadn't been brought up in the first handful of trainings. So we
Right.
we again, it just we have so many customers, and how do we tackle that? And we're just taking it one bite at a time.
Yeah. Excellent. So, quick question. You've gotten through all 200 employees in those 31 sessions. Is
Hmm.
there a plan in place? And I know you have other trainings that you're working on, right? Where there's other
Hmm.
content that you and I have worked on together in that workshop environment that you're still working to finalize and get into a training session similar to one we're talking about here. So there's more content to roll out to your team members.
Hmm.
I'm just curious, is there a plan in place to have any sort of annual look at this session that you just did, right? To have people go back through as a refresher, whether it's every year, every other year. Have you looked at that yet?
Yeah, so we have talked about it. So what we know we'll do for sure is as we plan out our second training, we will do like a look back at that first piece of the training, just reminding them, hey, this is our customer service action statement. This is where we're building everything from the foundation up. Here are our pillars, reminder of here are always and nevers. And then as we go through our second training, where we're going to be talking about negative cues and service recovery, all of
Yes.
that stuff from negative cues and service recovery, we're able to tie back to so much of the foundation that we built in that original training. So that's one of the first things that we're doing is in these next couple trainings, we'll always be tying back and pulling in those main principles and really starting the training with, hey, don't forget, this is what we talked about in the first training or the second training. Once we get all the trainings built, then we will be doing some kind of annual certification where team members will be going through potentially just a real quick recap training. Hopefully, we can do it at our forum where we're really pulling most of our staff together at the same time so we don't have to do a full training. But hey, don't forget, here are all the things we're doing. And then we want to do something in action where they're getting certified through customer service annually.
Yep. Okay. Excellent. Yeah, that's a great plan. I love the fact that as you roll new things out, you'll always focus on this foundation first, right? Because it all kind of stems from what we did first, and everything you're adding on to it really goes back to that original training, and you're just layering in more ways that you're focused on this. So that's fantastic.
I think another piece of it is we've been really reminding them since the very beginning that this is their training. I'm building it, I'm putting together the PowerPoints, I'm working with our marketing team to make it pretty. We've got a sponsor team that's kind of making some of those final decisions. We've got workshops where people are making these decisions, but they're really building the training. So in our second training, when we go back to, hey, here are our always and nevers, they're actually going to vote on the one they think that we're doing the worst at. So
Ah,
that is really going to help me build my third training where I'm going to be able to say, okay, these were things that we said were really important to us. We said we're not
mhm.
going to do these things anymore. We have to do it this way. So we're really going to, again, take their feedback and share that information with them and say, hey, out of our 10 always and nevers, these are things that we pledged that we weren't going to do anymore. And we knew it was going to take time. It's not an
Yep.
overnight, okay, Brenda told me we can't do it anymore, so we're not going to do it. It's been a part of our culture. But how do we reinforce that? If never say no, always find a solution is something we're still struggling with, we have to figure out where we're saying no the most often and help our team members identify solutions.
Right.
Because we go through the training and we walk through a couple ways of where do we say no and what's a different way that we cannot say no in the future, or how can we say it a little bit differently to help our customers feel better about our response. But maybe in the training we just never hit a specific department and where they say no and they can't figure out how to troubleshoot it themselves. So
Right.
that's where the organization is going to come together and really help find those solutions in those tough situations.
Excellent. Yeah, I love that plan. That's really, really solid. It keeps all of these things in front of your team members, keeps them thinking about it and focused on it.
Mhm.
And you can layer in new content as you go.
Yeah.
Excellent. So our guest today again is Brenda Larson from Community Blood Center. She is the manager of learning and organizational development and sharing some great tips about how she created and rolled out this training plan for all of their team members across all of their locations, over 31 training sessions. You shared with us some of the bright spots of that, right? To get those smaller groups together and go a little deeper, but also uncover some areas of opportunity in some additional training. So that's always really, really helpful. And you shared a couple of maybe roadblocks that you hit, for those that might be trying this endeavor for them to avoid. One thing I mentioned, Brenda, you are very soon to be a graduate of the Customer Experience Executive Academy. You'll be in Cleveland, Ohio soon for your last session and then to graduate. So I'm curious, as you look at the classwork you've done and to go through the academy, it's 4 quarters, so 4 3-day sessions to go through all of the content and learn everything. I'm just curious, as you are about to come to your last session and become an official graduate, what have you learned and put into place from that so far? And also, what are you looking forward to doing in the future with this information that you've learned?
Gosh, I don't even know where to start. So I'll probably just start rambling and maybe you have to pull me back in. The CXE Academy has been so helpful for me in so many different ways. I think collaboration with other businesses that have gone through this have had some of the same struggles that we have had. Sometimes you feel like you're on your own when you're starting a new project. So being part of a cohort where you're bouncing ideas off of each other, we're communicating in between when we actually have our in-person classes, and then seeing some of the organizations that have been working with you guys for a long time and not necessarily comparing ourselves, but striving to get to the points that they are, and understanding that this isn't a here we go, we're going to do this and then it's going to go away. Like this is a continuous project that we are going to
Right.
have to continue to work on. We have to continue to grow and develop it, listen to our people and change it accordingly. As we get good at customer service, we want to step it up. We don't want to just be good at customer service. We want to be great at customer service. So
Mm,
our teams are going to get to a point where we're going to excel. That's not where we stop, right? We just keep continuing because people can choose to go someplace else. They don't have to do business with us. We want
right.
them to do business with us because we're the best, not just because we're, you know, a couple miles from their house or we're coming to their business. we want them to go out into the community and say, you know what, the community blood center is the best at what they do.
Yep. Excellent. Excellent. That's so great to hear. So, Brenda, I want to thank you for joining us today because what you did, you brought some wisdom to today. You brought some wisdom that you already had going into this training process, but you also shared some wisdom, some things that you learned when you went through the process yourself and had to
Mhm.
get 31 different training sessions over a 3 month period, sometimes with 4 people in a class, sometimes with 20 people in a class, and all of your learnings from that. It was great to have you today. I know there's so many organizations that are either in the same situation as you, that are going to have to do multiple sessions to get this out, or maybe they've rolled something out in the past, but they need to do multiple sessions like this to really get their teams back up to speed, maybe refocused, or to your point, maybe learn a little bit about what's really happening out there and where there's some gaps that they weren't aware of previously.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Excellent, Brenda. Thank you so much for joining us on the Experience Revolution podcast. It was great to have you. So much great information. Keep doing great work. I'm looking forward to being back in Appleton soon to keep the work going. Keep it up, and congratulations again on CXEA and your soon to be graduation. And appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.